Good morning, people. Today I have a little bit of time, so we're going to get into this in some detail. And we'll just start to discuss what it means and what it takes to start to initiate this conversation um, with reality and how one goes about it. In doing so, we're going to discover that we already do that quite easily and readily. It's just that we approach it from an incorrect perspective, so we don't see it as such. Uh, but this is a practical matter, and it's not that difficult, and it's something that we experience all the time, every day. And in fact, we fall victim to influences that might be described as magical all the time. As such, we live lives that are not particularly autonomous and not particularly engaged in the process of engagement with reality. And that harms us. Ultimately, it harms our sense of connection, our ability to relate, and everything. And the results we see around us in a world, in fact, being destroyed by individuals desperately grasping for relevance and connection, but in the most backward and bent of ways. It's an existential crisis, and if we are going to find our way out of it, it can only come by reconnecting ourselves to reality in a healthy manner with realistic expectations, goals, purposes, and the rest. We're a long ways from that. So, I hope you have some time, because this will take some time today, but we will get into it. But first, again, and completely candidly, there are a couple of observations that need to be made, and made very overt and directly, because, again, there's so much cultural baggage surrounding this stuff, most of it coming from religious traditions that give us incorrect perspectives by which we investigate this material. And if you try to investigate this material from those perspectives, that will lead you off into the weeds, and like none of this becomes intelligible. There's plenty of material out there where people try to, generally for really inappropriate purposes and from really incorrect uh, perspectives, try to get into this material. There's a lot of that out there, and a lot of it's just completely unintelligible. What we're going to get at is very simple, straightforward, first person, and actionable. It's important to understand that magical practice, if done correctly, has no woo in it. There's no spirity, any kind of weirdness in it. It's a proto-scientific um, protocol, really, if not a completely scientific protocol. It's just a scientific protocol examining um, the experiential universe rather than the illusion of material reality. Okay, um, it has a domain that it is singled out for inquiry, and that's where we're going. Um, this leads us into a question about whether it's a rational or irrational inquiry, and it's both, of course. Interestingly enough, the gateway to magical practice in the modern world has been rationality and science, most typically. Isaac Newton's experience being a very good one there, a fellow who has a conception of the universe as the design of a grand watchmaker and a belief in formal principles governing gravitation and everything, real physics, right? But Isaac Newton, because he was very rational, knows, like any of us should know, that if you are at all rational or math literate, um, you run into the boundaries of the ability of those tools to describe the world quite quickly. I mean, in fact, from physics. The three-body problem is a good example of this, that you can formally derive orbits of two but not three bodies governed by gravitation. It's beyond the capacity of math or logic or formal systems to describe those things. They fall into chaotic functions, quote unquote, very quickly. It only takes three variables to do that. And practically any human concern that we encounter, even the most of mundane human concerns, are radically more complicated than three variables. And we're navigating our lives faced perpetually with problems, conundrums, need for knowledge, and the rest, okay, that are rationally understood to be beyond the ability of the rational mind to comprehend. Now we have a bias where we believe that we think about those things, right? And that somehow we rationally puzzled them out. But rational individuals who take rationality seriously know that that's not the case. And it isn't that rationality or mathematics are not powerful tools. In fact, for most of Western philosophic history, they were seen as divine tools and gifts and tools that you could find revelation from. But there was never a belief, really, that they were somehow just the absolute beacon and ultimate tool that would allow you to solve every problem in the universe. I mean, that briefly arose, but it's not supportable, right? If we're honest, it's not a supportable thing. Rationality takes us here. Rationality forces us to acknowledge that we must come to terms with a way of understanding the irrational in order to navigate reality as it actually exists. There is no woo here, okay? That needs to be said first and foremost. Now, a second perspective here that just plagues the hell out of this kind of inquiry comes from, the Chopra diamond-encrusted glasses crowd, right, that have made tremendous money capitalizing on the narcissistic tendencies of modern people. Very, very exploitive view. This idea that the universe is somehow something that your mind manifests, right? And that by changing your attitude towards the universe, you can change the universe, and that kind of attitude, right? And that's incredibly poisonous in how it exploits people, because the conundrum of the modern era is one of alienation, right? And that alienation comes from not having a good grip or relationship with reality, no practical first-hand relevant experience there. So it's easy to be persuaded into this kind of infantile view, this infantile, almost narcissistic, very infantile, solipsistic view that your mind is somehow fundamental and it creates the university experience, I guess. But anyone who has a meaningful relationship with reality that's tactile and first person doesn't come to that conclusion, right? The magical practice is contrary to the view that the universe is something that your mind creates, okay? Magical practice is grounded in the, really empirically demonstrable reality that your mind is a product of the universe, okay? It isn't that you're dreaming a reality. The reality is, if anything, dreaming you. That's your relationship to reality. So, of course, having that perspective brings with it a tremendously different value set, right? If you think that you're the mind dreaming the universe because you're just fundamentally out to lunch, then trying to manifest diamond-encrusted sunglasses and condominiums and crap like that is interesting to you, I guess. right? Because it's a very childish, inwardly directed view that has really no sense of connection, okay? If you know that you are a product of the underlying substrate, right, then you're interested in the underlying substrate, not diamond-encrusted sunglasses and condominiums and such, right? Again, magical practice comes from the view that the universe dreams you, if you want to use that metaphysical language, but at very least, you are an experience that the universe is having, not that the universe is an experience you are having. This is essential to understand. So let's make that completely clear. So a last observation here that is essential to understanding how to approach this material. We've discussed here in the past a great deal, and it's the observation that comes from Albert Korzybski in his General Semantics about reality, and that is this, that reality is not an illusion, but it is an abstraction, okay? This follows on the heels of what we've just been talking about, meaning that the reality that it's out there, whatever it is, it's not a product of your mind, it's not an illusion, it's not a phantasm, it has an existence in and of itself, okay? But as you experience it, the way that you build it up, that is an abstraction. It is a model. As you arise, as however conscious you might be from this underlying substrate, and you experience the thing that you call life, you inhabit a virtual world of largely your own creation, heavily colored by choices, prejudices, epigenetic influences, and the rest, okay? It's largely a construct. It is an abstraction, but it is certainly not an illusion, all right? Now that doesn't mean, of course, that, you know, like the hippies and the diamond encrusted glasses people like to say that by changing your mind you change the world. I mean, you do, I guess, but you change the experiential world. You don't have any impact on the underlying substrate. Certainly, if you choose to build the abstraction that you inhabit as an experiential being by deliberately focusing on some things rather than others, well, they just become a bigger part of your reality than other things. That's obvious, and that doesn't require any woo. But again, we're not making any claims about whether or not somehow, by just force of will, you can make fundamental changes in the substrate itself, which again has its own independent existence. I mean, we might assume that through physical action we might be able to make physical change in physical reality. Okay? Cognitive states alone won't do that. I mean, that gets into a thorny conversation. But the main thing is to understand that reality exists. Okay? It's not an illusion. But as you experience it, it is an abstraction. It is a model. And that model is within your conscious control to manipulate should you choose to do so. Okay, so I am about to, should you choose to pursue this path, ask you a question. And this question will demonstrate to you completely the reality of the domain of at least the gateway to magical practice. I will force you to have at least the beginning of a conversation with the underlying substrate. There's a question that I will ask you that I am nearly certain that if you answer it, it'll force you to come into connection with an inner dialogue. Okay? And this will open the gateway for all the rest. Okay? So I would encourage you to take it very seriously and be in a position where you can spend a little time to reflect on what's about to happen when I ask you this question, and take it just as seriously as you should, because again, this will open the door to this essential skill that you're about to develop, which is to have these inner conversations with the underlying substrate and know that it's a real thing and it's something that you can actually do. First, very, very simple, and then we can move into more advanced ways of doing it as we go along. But I want to demonstrate to you that it's real, okay? And that's why I'm starting right here. So I would encourage you not to go forward in the video until you're in a position where I can ask you this question and you can reflect on the consequences that come from it, all right? So if you're in a spot where you can do this and you have some time to reflect, well then take it on. Otherwise, wait till later, okay? And so this is 1640 in, and you can just pause your video here and we'll get back to it in whenever you're ready. Okay, let's assume you're ready and you're in a position where you don't have a lot of distractions, and you can just open your mind to this one very simple question I'm going to ask you, and observe what happens when I ask you this question, and you will understand, once this question is asked, that the magical world is real, and actually having a conversation with the underlying substrate is very immediate. Okay? So if you're ready for the question, then just sit there and close your eyes, and I'm going to ask you this question. All right? Are you ready? Here's the question. What would you like for dinner? Okay, now when you get done chuckling about that, in all seriousness, if I've done this correctly, I have set you up for a magical experience there, and you should be aware of what's happened. There are 3 points to take away. First of all, magical experiences only happen when you're listening. Okay? They only happen when you're paying attention. So you were paying attention, and because you were paying attention, this came galloping into you and gave you something to think about. If we're caught up in our own heads and we're not paying attention to what's going in the world, there's no opportunity for magical things to reach to you, and there will be no voices that you will hear. Okay? You have to be paying attention. Second of all, your mind has to be open to the fact that magical experiences could come through anything. Okay? Don't have preconceptions about what magical questions look like, because if you do, you will miss 99.99% of them, because you've been preconditioned to think that magic looks a certain way, and it does not. It comes absolutely through the complete and fully mundane all day long. Third, something popped into your mind when I asked you the question about what you want for dinner. And that is, little voices within you started to think about stuff. And these little voices were not rational. They're like, ooh, I don't know, maybe pot roast. Oh, I don't know, maybe this, okay? And you got cravings that were communicated to you about certain things that within the underlying substrate that gives the ability for your consciousness to arise. Little voices came out trying to express to you either addictions or nutritional needs or such, and you simply receive those in your head as communications from your body about what to do, and then you consciously make choices based on that conversation. Okay? You know already that these things talk to you, and they talk to you all day long. They may just be saying, hey, let's go have a cheeseburger. Okay? At the most mundane level, that's where the conversation begins, and that's where it lies. Now, if you develop this ability, you can do it better, and you can make choices that are more in alignment with your own personal health. And you can have the ability to have a dialogue with those inner voices so that they may crave things that are better for you than worse. You know, they may not want cheesy Frito nachos or something. They may want something else. Okay? Given the opportunity to have a dialogue and a little persuasion, right? If you've not done that, it's probably that they just shout at you what they want, right? And that you more or less cater to the urges that they present to you, right? But the point of magical practice is having this dialogue with as much as the underlying substrate as you can. And this very magical question I just presented to you demonstrated to you that that already happens. And you do it all the time, okay? Now it becomes a matter of fine-tuning that and getting to be more adept at it and trying to discover how deep into the underlying substrate you can go and still have an authentic conversation, okay? So there you go. There is a place to start. Be aware that you must be paying attention, that you must not have preconceptions, and that you must be aware of the fact that things happen to you all day long that get the little bits of you in the underlying substrate a chatter, right? And either those things are going to dominate your life, or they will be sources of energy for you to direct your life in a manner that is more in accordance with your will, let's just say, okay? That's a good place to start. Now, as we go forward a little bit here, I think I'll get into techniques that are more sophisticated, all right? But those I'm going to release only as private videos that require subscription, okay? Because some of them come from my own personal experience, and some of them were given to me by people that are important. And they're not the kind of thing that I want just plagiarized like crazy by, well, you know, the kinds of people that you meet on YouTube, okay? So if you're going to want to have access to those, you're going to need to be subscribed, and maybe we might need something a little more than that. Like you might need to deliberately ask for permission to see them, okay? Because it's important. And there is the possibility for self-delusion in these things that is real. You know, I don't want to get into it as, you know, being particularly dangerous, because I mean the fact is, like, the world is pretty diluted anyway. I don't think anything that I'm going to teach you would make you any more deluded than you already are, if that's your proclivity, right? But you know, some of these things are kind of personal, and because they are, it's not just something I want to cast out in front of anybody. So if you want kind of the more practical stuff, otherwise we'll continue the conversation in the more abstract. But I hope that I've given you something now to at least start with, and to start to develop your connection to reality as a dialogue and as a relationship, as a dialogos, as I've said in the past, okay? And hopefully you've been able to see that it's something you already do. It's just a matter of having a perspective that's accurate and the intent to develop it, and the rest of it starts to unfold. Anyway, cheers, people. I have the day off today. I'll see what else I can do because this is on my mind. Had a lot of conversations about it over the weekend, and strike where the iron's hot. But I've got to do some marine engine repair today, and we'll see if I can revisit it later. Cheers, people. Have a good one. I hope that's helpful.